Okay, my name is Cyril Colonel, and I live in Wynndel, BC. And my dad wanted to get away from the cold and tough in Alberta. We came from Camrose. And he came out and visited here with two other farmers. And they were gone for about a month. And while he was out here, he bought a piece of land. And he came back and told us he'd found a paradise and we're moving. And it was that simple. We came in 2 carloads. My mother and my younger brother and sister came out on a passenger train, and I rode out with my dad in a boxcar. It took best part of 5 days to get here. So it was purchased off of a logger up Duck Creek at Wynndel, about 2 miles up Duck Creek. And my sister and I had 2 miles of bush road to walk every morning for school to catch the bus. And so there was a little excitement there because there was bears around and supposedly cougars. I never saw one, but we saw a bear. And in the wintertime, it was in the dark. We usually had a lantern. When we first moved here, there was Duck Lake, and there was meadows down there. And I was down there watching our cattle. We had a cattle, and I was down there watching the cattle, and the fire started near the railroad track. Like the track goes all the way down along the east side of the valley. And this fire started, and it wasn't very big to start with, but it soon grew. And a locomotive had started it. They had, it was old steamer days, and they had screens over top of their stack to stop the sparks, but that restricted their draft, and sometimes the engineer would remove the screen. So he started some fires. That one burned right halfway between here and Sirdar, and it burned up the mountain, and it burned back about 18 miles, and then it came down Duck Creek Valley, and we happened to be there, and we got burned out in it. A sawmill logging camp got burned out in it. Burns Farstead and Farstead's Creston Sawmills logging camp got burned out. The Japanese were brought in to fight the fire. The internment camp, they were brought from the internment camp over at Slocan. They hauled them over in boxcars, and they took them back in train coaches, but they brought them over in boxcars. And I've heard all kinds of different numbers. I've heard there was 300 and there was 500, but there was lots of them. And they made a camp right in Wynndel, right on Duck Creek, down by the railroad. And that's where they operated from. And then I'd say there was about 200 other people from around here So it was a pretty big fire. And it burned right down the valley. So, and stopped, about 300 yards past our place. And these Japanese were all up and down that road, face it, to fight the fire. And the fire wasn't down yet, but anyway, when the fire came down, everybody started getting out of there, and the Japanese were frightened, and they got in the creek. And the people that operated the Wynndel Irrigation District told Dad he better string barbed wire in the creek to keep them out of the creek because it was drinking water. But they were, they seemed like very gentle people. And I met some of them when I was trucking. I used to come in with loads of fertilizer, and I used to get them to come and help unload. As far as I was concerned, they were fine people. I saw lots of Indians out on the prairie. And I might mention, I called them Indians. One time when I was trucking, I went out to pick up a load of dairy cattle out near Lloydminster, Saskatchewan. And I stayed in an old hotel near where this dairy farm was. I wanted to load the load of dairy cattle that someone here had bought and load them that evening, but they decided they would sooner I load in the morning. So I went into the bar to have a beer, and there was 3 big Indians in there having a beer, and there was nobody else. And they invited me over to the table. And of course, we exchanged notes of where they're from and what they did. And they were pretty big farmers, actually. Anyway, we started talking, and I used the word natives. And the guys, they kind of looked at each other, and somehow it came up. I think I used the word Aboriginal. And he said, "You BC guys are nuts, you know?" He said, "We're North American Indians, and we're proud of it. And anytime you talk about us, you call us Indians." You know, so that was kind of an experience. And I used to spend a lot of time around Wynndel, different places that I would go, and I felt a little safer when I was on the horse. It was pretty exciting examining everything, and I spent a lot of time on Duck Lake. And there wasn't any store, or there wasn't a place you could buy gas, but there was a coffee shop. And the fellow that ran the coffee shop, his name was Davidge. I wish I could remember his first, Terry Davidge. And he had been in the army. The war was over when he came back, and it was just a shack that he built, and he put a counter in it and had a stove or hot plate. And he would, people would go down there. He cooked a pretty good hamburger. But when you look at Wynndel now and you look at it then, as big as it is now, it was just as big then. But there wasn't the improvements around that there is now. You look at there was a bridge to get across Duck Creek. And when you look at where the footings are for that bridge now, they're just wee little footings. Now there's a fill across that creek. And my sister and I were of the age where we could work for farmers picking fruit or work in the fields. And I worked for a fella by the name of Ogilvy quite a bit. And he raised potatoes and Spanish onions and pumpkins for seed. We'd have to, he'd set rows of planks out, and you'd cut pumpkins in half and scoop the seeds out and spread them out on the planks, and they'd dry. And he raised Spanish onions. And about one slice out of a Spanish onion would cover a slice of bread. And they were really mild. You could pretty near eat them like an apple. So we used to take buttered bread to work and cut the slice out of the middle of an onion. And that was our meal. And then we pick potatoes up out of the field. It wasn't like it is now. They'd had a machine. There's one out in the museum here that they would just pull behind the horses. At that time, he'd pull it behind a tractor, and it just scooped them up and shook the dirt out of them and laid them on top of the ground, and you'd have to pick them up. So it was a source of income for us as a kid. We got 2 bits an hour. And second year, I think I might have got 35 cents an hour. But he employed a lot. The Drunken Chickens happened during the Wynndel fire. And we were getting 25 cents an hour packing water to the firefighters up the fire line. So we made a little bit of money. And I don't know, we had another fellow there, and he was a bachelor. His name was Gib McCullough, and he was different. And he ended up getting us a bottle of whiskey. And we had never ever drank it before, but we ended up paying him for this. And I'd say maybe we drank about half of it. And we're all pretty well swacked, I would say. And we decided to go home. And for me to go home, there was a shortcut through the chicken yard to get where my folks' place was. And out in the field in front of the chicken house, there was troughs for water. And I was feeling pretty sick. So I emptied the bottle in a trough, one of the troughs of water, and figured I'd never drink that stuff again, you know. So anyway, I heard noises upstairs, and I could look out the door and look in through the window into the kitchen and dining area. And my mother and Mrs. Davidge and my dad had chickens in there that were sick. And they couldn't figure out what was wrong with them. And it was pretty funny, but it wasn't funny. Because those chickens are worth a lot of money to them. But I'll tell you, a drunk chicken is something else. They sit there and their head hanging over. They're right on their head, and they're on their breast, and their head is laying out. And it was funny to hear them. And they say, well, it looks like this one's getting better. You know? Anyhow, Burns and Farstead was still logging up Duck Creek. The fire was in 45, but in 48, there was still some timber left up there. They were logging with horses up there. They finally got a cat, like a dozer. But at first they were doing all the skidding with horses. And the horses lived right in the camp, like the men did. There was local men from Creston that lived in that camp. You know, they'd, instead of finding transportation back and forth, they'd stay right in camp all week. Horses were really pretty smart. You could, they would go from the landing where the logs would be loaded back up to where they were skidding from without a teamster a lot of the times. And they would turn them loose, they'd hook them onto logs, and they knew they had to go back down to the landing. And sometimes they'd get a log in behind a stump or something. And through all their logging experience, I guess, with a teamster, they learned, say if that's a stump and they're hooked up, they'd pull this way and they'd pull that way and they'd pull that way until they pulled it out from around the stump. So when they got down for dinner time, they knew when it was time to get a half a gallon of oats or some fresh hay or something. So they'd eat their lunch with the men at the landing. You couldn't get them to go back up the trail to log. And they were big horses, really big horses. My dad called from the contractor for the Kootenay River Bridge, and he said, well, we met in the motel, and he was surprised to see me, but he didn't know my history after I left here for the 10 years. And so I've had lots of experience around this heavy equipment. And I think he was a little put out about it, you know. But anyway, we got it done, and we built the bridge. We had one bad accident on the bridge. Nobody lost their life, but it come very close. And it was something that should never have happened, but it happened. They were spreading riprap along the riverbank on the end of the bridge. And they had what they call a Bailey Bridge. And a Bailey Bridge is a military bridge that you can put across any kind of a stream or something fast. So they built a turntable where they fastened it onto the edge of the ground of the dike. And then they built a framework and put drums in it. Empty drums for flotation device. And the people were arguing. I mean, the men that are working in that construction can see things when they're haywire. But this foreman wouldn't listen to him. Anyway, I was working on a crane, and I was sitting this way, and I could look out the window and I could see a truck just starting to back out there. The signal man I was working with wanted me to swing the machine, and I wanted to watch this truck back out, you know. Anyway, I ended up, I had to swing. You don't disobey a signalman. And I swung, and he picked up a load, and I swung back, and it's all gone. It went right into the river. The flotation device that he built didn't hold the truck. And the truck went into the river, and the driver is swimming for shore. And that superintendent took off in his pickup, and we never saw him again. That was the end of him. And that driver was a Russian fellow from Castlegar. He had the truck leased for the job. And boy, he was on the rampage. I was told at least 2 days looking for this guy, because he just lost his life, you know. I would have been 1949 and 50 and 51. I was picked up to ship fruit, look after shipping fruit out of Wynndel. Wynndel was the strawberry capital of, I would say, probably British Columbia. I don't know what the coast was like then, but we shipped thousands of crates out here. And I used to come back and ship fruit, look after building cars and that. But I ended up, when that was over, I ended up working on the train, picking up freight and that sort of thing. and I was on runs. I was on runs from Calgary to Vancouver, Nelson to Medicine Hat, Edmonton to Saskatoon, and places, different runs. I was, I guess what you'd call a relief express messenger. Say one got sick or retired and the job was up for bid. And I had some good runs that took a lot of seniority, but I didn't have any seniority, just a few years. But it was pretty exciting. I think that was my favorite occupation. If I'd had the opportunity to retire off of that, I'd have stayed and retired off it. It was exciting. It was lots of action. I had to carry a revolver in those days as an express messenger. First, I think I should say I enjoyed work. Work was more or less my hobby. I really enjoyed work, and I never worked for did any type of work that I didn't enjoy.